Welcome to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your host, Jeongmin Kim, the editorial director of Korea Pro.
And I'm John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro.
Join us for a weekly 15-minute conversation as we dive into the most pressing stories shaping South Korea and dissect the most complicated ones for you.
From politics to culture, technology to society, we've got you covered. So stay ahead of the curve and never be sidelined again.
So get ready for a fresh perspective on South Korea's news. This is the Korea Pro podcast. We're recording Thursday, May 9th, 2:30 p.m., and it's been maybe a couple of hours since the South Korean president's first press conference in 21 months just wrapped up. We will go to that in a few minutes, but let's start with some foreign policy related issues this week and also trade and company related stuff. There has been relatively new type of tension between South Korea and Japan, and it's not dokdo, not history, not forced labor, not comfort women, but it relates to business. Line Yahoo, Naver, and who versus who was it?
Well, this is a pretty big one.
Right.
Sure, we have had all of these historical issues and territorial disputes, but those have always been status quo. This is a relatively new dispute between South Korea and Japan. What happened was that in last November, there was a data breach in this messenger app called Line in Japan. And about 500,000 lines of information was released. And the Japanese government was quite furious about this. And now the reason why this matters to South Korea is that Line Yahoo is jointly owned by Japanese SoftBank and by Naver in South Korea. They own this company called A Holdings. It's a joint venture company, and they both own 50% each. And because of this, Naver has a rather big stake over Line. But what happened was that when they investigate as to how this data breach happened, it turns out that some hackers were able to expose a loophole through a third-party subsidiary that was working for Naver. And so as far as the Japanese Interior Ministry and Communications is concerned, they are thinking that, okay, so Naver is the weak link. And so in order to protect Japanese users from potential data breaches and hacking and cybercrimes, then the Japanese companies like SoftBank and Line Yahoo should divest themselves from South Korea's, or in this case, Naver's finances.
Like we know that we have gone through the information security issues in South Korea before with multiple stories, and it's not a secret that South Korean platforms lack cybersecurity measures.
Just in NK News, there was a report about how North Korea had hacked South Korean defense companies.
Right. It's so it's not surprising that we're hearing this, but then it is surprising that companies are actually taking these big measures, and also apparently government involved as well.
Well, this isn't unprecedented because in the U.S., they just signed a bill that said that ByteDance would have to sell off TikTok for TikTok to continue operating in the U.S. And now this is the U.S. versus China, of course. But based on this sort of precedent, the Japanese government seems to be doing the sort of same thing with Naver.
Right. So what's interesting is with the TikTok issue, it's U.S. versus China sort of context. So it's not geopolitically surprising. But Japan and South Korea, they have, under this administration, the ties were generally very good. And then this happening, this is not a very good news for Yoon administration.
Yoon just in his press briefing today that he and Kishida have this trusting relationship with each other. And so, despite what the two leaders might be saying, both governments are being a bit more antagonistic toward each other, because with the Japanese government saying that Line Yahoo should divest themselves or reconsider their financial relationship with Naver, the South Korean government officials have been responding very strongly. It's been bipartisan. The People Power Party, the Democratic Party, they've been saying that they're going to protect South Korean companies from what they call unfair treatment from foreign governments.
Rare moment of solidarity.
It's against Japan, so I guess, yeah.
But even with Japan, it's very rare.
It is. And so what's going on is that as far as Naver is concerned, the Naver CEO said they haven't really decided on what to do about it yet. They said that they will base their decisions on what they say, quote unquote, long-term business decisions. But I'm not sure if Naver can wait to make their own decision, because the Japanese government made this very strong request to Line to divest themselves. And so this company, Line Yahoo, is going to have to make a move one way or another.
What did Line Yahoo say?
Line Yahoo essentially just said that they were so very surprised at this very strong directive that they got from Tokyo, and so they haven't actually announced what they will do, but they did say that they are going to consider this guideline by the Japanese government.
If this actually happens to the level of what the Japanese government is envisioning, isn't this a big blow for just South Korean tech companies in general?
It would be rather big because, firstly, like I said, Naver has a 50% control over a line, and there are approximately 100 million line users in Japan. This is a huge revenue stream for Naver, and this would really make it difficult for Naver to remain competitive in Japan. And so that's the immediate fallout, of course. But what might happen is that if Line Yahoo has to follow through with the Japanese government's recommendation or request, then there might be a hostile corporate takeover of those shares. And so that would lead to litigation. It would get very ugly.
Right, and not just this, but also just South Korean. Naver is the biggest portal site in South Korea, and just the image of South Korean portal owning companies, it would be very bad if it's about information security issue.
Exactly, which brings us, of course, to other bigger pictures like AUKUS Pillar 2.
Right. It doesn't look like they're immediately connected or anything, but we thought it's very interesting that it's happening now.
At the same time.
At the same time. Just to brief you a little bit, in case our listener missed this news last week, Australia is one of 3 countries that South Korea agreed to do 2+2 foreign and defense ministerial meeting regularly alongside US and the UK. So it's a very, very big deal. Of course, it happened during a power vacuum last week because there's no ambassador right now from South Korean side to Australia. So there was a charge d'affaires that was there alongside the ministers. But this was about Pillar 2 of AUKUS. Just very briefly, AUKUS, it's known in South Korea more related to the Pillar 1, the nuclear submarine.
Sure, the big flashy headlines.
Right, and there were a lot of misleading reports in South Korea last week about how this is about nuclear submarine potentially, and I was like, no, that's not. That's not. It's not what it is. There are other countries that are considering or being considered to join Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is about sharing high-tech, advanced military technology with each other.
And also providing subsidies, a lot of cash incentives.
For private companies that are involved in providing or sharing or jointly developing such technology. And other countries include Canada, Japan, and this time South Korea, and also there's New Zealand. But in New Zealand, there's a domestic pushback a little bit right now. And the Pillar 2 related news last week, it mostly, in South Korea, it was all about, Japan is joining, will we join it too? What's the possibility? A South Korean defense minister framed it like, thank you for considering us, which made into headlines sounding like South Korea is already accepted. But that's not the case. It's actually
the offer hasn't even really been made yet, not officially.
No, it's more like, but it was a big deal that they met and they went to all these defense facilities, defense industry facilities in Australia related to South Korean companies. There are big potential and ongoing exports of technology and facilities and actual goods as well to Australia.
And South Korea has also been sharing its technology with a lot of countries that has been selling weapons too anyway.
Right. And although it was a big news, it wasn't like they offered it. But it's actually very strict to get into Pillar 2. If you read the Pillar 2 related statements from US and others in the AUKUS system, you actually have to demonstrate and prove that you have willingness, commitment, and capabilities to protect sensitive information and information security.
Which South Korea has not been able to do for quite a while.
Right, and this Naver issue becomes an actually very good example of even on the private level, this is not really happening that well. And we know that a lot of South Korean officials and, government-backed researchers, they use private emails as well.
And we've covered that extensively here in Korea Pro.
Right, so it's not that these two issues are directly related, but it's just that it's a very bad example to have right now when the Pillar 2 consideration is
It is
going
not a good
on.
look. It's just going to cast a bigger spotlight on all the security issues that South Korea has failed, especially with missile defense, with drones, with submarines, and even this attempted theft of the KF-21 one technology not too long ago. This will all start coming in. And this is just not going to be a good look for South Korea. And its chances of being actually invited to join Pillar 2, that doesn't seem all that promising at this point.
It's not 100% right now. It looks like near 100% for Japan, though. But then I think another part that a lot of South Korean headlines about this miss was that it's not a one-way. It's not like joining just this fancy platform and just getting something from this platform. It's more like you have to provide things as well, including
Quid pro quo.
sensitive core technologies that South Korea developed. And
Right.
I don't think this is. They really have to do this cost-benefit analysis, not just the government, but also the private sector involved as well, right? Because they will be receiving financial aid as well. But what's more important, just protecting their core high-tech, advanced technology for themselves and for sales, or sharing it for wider Indo-Pacific security. It's going to be a really difficult call for companies to make.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Let's move on to the Yoon press conference. It was... I think the Q&A session was maybe hour and a half, and he, of course, started with a keynote address in his office, sitting down in front of the buck stops here.
The plaque that
Biden gave him for 20 minutes. At first, I thought his aides and Yoon looked like, to give him some credit, he worked pretty hard to make himself sound more humble than in the past.
More humble and more apologetic.
Right, he was very apologetic compared to how he was in the past when it comes to domestic controversies and also all the special investigations issue. He mostly focused on the economic woes that the South Korean citizens were going through, and he apologized for not improving it more.
Or being communicative enough.
Oh, that was actually surprising that he said that. He said that one of the reasons why ruling party lost was because people wanted to punish the government. It's partly because he failed to communicate better, which
For
is
21 months.
right. And it's true.
Yeah.
So he's right. But he was apologetic. But when it comes to the Q&A session, foreign media would have been disappointed looking at this because it was mostly on domestic issues and economic issues as well. When it comes to domestic politics, what were some of the top revelations from it?
Well, one of the biggest ones was, of course, about the Choi Sang-byung.
The Marine's death last year,
Yes.
and the investigation into potential power abuse.
Right. There was a heavy rain monsoon season last year in July. There was a search and rescue operation. Some of the Marines got swept up by currents. 2 of them were rescued. 1 was not. He ended up being killed. And so there have been a lot of internal investigations to see what happened, what was the order that was given, why were they not given life vests, etc., etc. And this also ties back to the Australian, Lee Jong-suk, the South Korean defense minister at the time, who was later sent to Australia as an ambassador.
And then resigned.
But we've mentioned this many times already,
Right,
so
right,
we can just skip that over. But eventually what President Yoon said was that he was going to agree to have a special prosecutor to reinvestigate as to what exactly happened.
But if the current level of investigation is proven not enough from the public's point of view, and this is a very big if,
Right.
because on the surface, he sounded like he was making this concession to the opposition party. But if you look at his line of logic, he's basically saying that the current investigators are working very hard and I trust them.
Right, it's ongoing, so there's no need for a special prosecutor yet.
For now. But still, being tentatively open to a special investigation, that's the first time that he said something like that. So it's something to keep an eye on. But by making this concession, he also sort of maintained his current, the original position about the First Lady.
Right. Now, First Lady has been accused of many things, but in this particular case, what the opposition party has been really targeting was her connections with Deutsche Motors. There have been allegations that she had manipulated Deutsche Motors stock prices so that she could financially benefit, and they are also calling for a special prosecutor for that. But for this one, Yoon has just put his foot down, and he says, no way.
So this time around, the DP actually added the Dior gate.
Right.
So that's what the prosecutors vowed to actually investigate, which was also a big news last week. And what Yoon said this time was that same logic. I trust them. they will investigate what's needed when it comes to, but still, he was kind of apologetic for his wife. He said that she wasn't being wise enough.
Her unwise decision, he said. But what I found rather clever coming from the president was that he was saying that, I know, it's clever from the president. It's usually not something that we say, but this one was, I think, a rather clever line. He said that that this entire Deutsche Motors thing, this investigation began during the Moon administration, and they found no real connections to actually be able to prosecute her.
Right.
And so he was saying that, are you telling me that during the investigations during the Moon administration, they were not being very strict with their investigations, that they were being very deferential to me even back then? And
that was a good line.
That was a very good line.
Very smart. And also, he did not mention Moon directly, but he still said, I trust the capabilities of the investigators.
Right, and so I thought
it was during Moon administration.
Right, and so it was a rather smart defense for him to play.
Well, and let's move on to non-domestic issues. There were a few foreign policy related questions. None of the South Korean reporters asked foreign policy. It was all foreign correspondent. It was BBC, Reuters, a Japanese outlet. And I guess the top news was his remarks related to Russia, although it was mostly generic and the repeat of old talking points. But I think it could be potentially problematic from the point of view of Western partnering countries in the U.S. because he made it sound like he's aiming. It was his word actually. He said that he aims at keeping the economic ties with Russia on amicable level, although the ties he will consider on case-by-case basis.
Right.
And when it comes to ties with North Korea, between Russia and North Korea, when it comes to the arms deals, he just basically repeated his old talking points even when he was pushed by reporters to tell us what the red lines are when it comes to Russia's action and when it comes to also Trump-related questions as well. The Trump-related question, the answer was interesting.
I thought it was, again, it's astounding that I'm saying this twice. Again, it was a rather smart answer. He said that
he prepared it well, I think.
Yeah, he said that he was not going to answer it. That he said it would be inappropriate for him to comment on domestic U.S. politics when it's still going on right now. There's no way to know who's going to win, and so it would be inappropriate for him to give a remark as to what might happen if Trump returns.
Like defense cost sharing and what the red line would be for the cost spike would be and the potential expansion of the USFK's purview outside the peninsula. So the question was implying Taiwan issues, right? But he said this thing where he's like, it's inappropriate for me to answer, but it's quite funny that we are saying this is a smart move because this is what presidents are supposed to say.
Which he hasn't said before in the past.
Right.
Where was this guy for the past 2 years?
Maybe he has better aides now.
Well, he should have had better aids from the beginning, I guess. So, yeah, I was watching this entire thing. So he's giving smart answers. What's going on?
And lastly, in foreign policy, there was Japan question, which he just also repeated past comments as well, right? This is for the future generation.
This is for the future. Kishida and I have a trusting relationship, etc., etc. There was no real big answer that was a big surprise.
Or a good news for journalists who were seeking sexy headlines. Like he didn't say anything related to preemptive strikes like he did before, or anything anywhere near that provocative.
Right.
And lastly, on social and economic issues. Social, actually, I was really disappointed with the journalist questions. It was all South Korean media reporters. Actually, there was one econ-related questions in the social segment, which was a waste of time, I think. And also, they didn't bring up the Itaewon special investigation issue. Nobody asked that.
They didn't bring up Itaewon. And also, they didn't bring up the murder that happened in Gangnam just yesterday. President Yoon was the prosecutor general before he became the president. He is a man of the law. You would think that a man of his professional background would be able to have a thing or two to say about crimes, about punishments, about what to do to prevent these sorts of things. But these questions were not asked. He was not given the opportunity to actually give an answer as to these crimes that are always occurring in this country.
I was so what's
frustrated.
I was really frustrated listening to it. And well, so that was social issues. Not much. Oh, one thing, low birth rate. He announced that there will be apparently a new ministry or so.
A new ministry, a control tower, he described it,
Right.
to really focus on the country's low birth rate.
But he didn't explain what this control tower will be doing and how they will resolve it, and whether or not gender ministry is gone, because this used to be gender ministry's purview.
The low birth rate policies have always been under the gender ministry's purview, as you just said. But the question is, what does it mean for the gender ministry then? Because is he going to hollow it out? Because there's no way they can get rid of the ministry now.
Right, but also it would be tricky because gender ministry not only handles low birth rate issues, they also handle different types of crimes and different types of vulnerable population. And other issues related to gender and family. So it will be very tricky. But low birth rate ministry, let's keep an eye on this next week and going forward as well. We have no idea what it's going to look like in reality. And also it will need the parliament's
Approval
and cooperation, which I don't think is going to happen if it goes alongside getting rid of the gender ministry. When it comes to econ, there were a few mention of pension and tax related issues. Just briefly, what were them?
Right. The biggest thing that I saw was that he wanted to raise the monthly pension for senior citizens. I forget
that they receive.
I forget what the sum is. Was it 400,000?
Something like that.
400,000 won per month for each pensioner. Now that's going to be good news for a lot of retirees. More money. Who's going to say no to that? But of course, the big problem that comes with that is that giving pensions to senior citizens who are unemployed, especially, is going to be great news in the short term. But what happens to the fund, the National Pension Service Fund? We are already projected to see the NPS go broke in about what is it, 10, 15 years?
There's a cliff coming up.
There's a cliff coming up. But we are now going to give senior citizens more money when the tax base is shrinking.
Also, in line with this pension plan, he talked about all these deregulation and less taxes for
exactly.
Right?
Sure. The idea is sound. Less taxes or fewer taxes or what have you will give a boost to companies to be able to produce more. But that does not change the fact that the tax base will shrink.
Exactly.
And so, how are we going to keep the NPS feasible for the long term?
Right.
Even now, it's looking impossible. But now he seems like he's going to about to fast forward the date for the NPS to collapse.
Well, so not much change aside from that money that he mentioned. He didn't really explain how to resolve these underlying problems when he was announcing this today, right?
So I guess there were two instances when I thought he was smart.
Well, okay, that's it for the presser. And let's move on to the week ahead.
Unlock the full Korea Pro experience by joining our community. Stay informed, stay ahead, and never miss a beat on Korean affairs that matter. Subscribe today and transform the way you understand Korea.
All right, week ahead. We just briefly mentioned the murder in Gangnam. This is near the area where the whole Me Too movement started in South Korea after a murder of a young South Korean woman by a random stranger who was was it the station bathroom?
I believe it was, yes.
Right. So this is what kicked off the mass mobilization of women activists and women's rights activists who saw this as a crime based on misogyny.
Right.
And this could potentially come back. We're actually surprised that there's no mass protests about this yet, but the investigation's ongoing. The guy just got detained.
And it just happened yesterday. And the Korean media was focusing on the part where he is a med student and that he
killing another med student.
Killing another med student who was his girlfriend.
I thought it was a cheap shot in headlines to just focus on how he's a med school student. Even when the fundamental gist of this incident, this murder, is a man killing a woman.
And again, it's not the first time that a man has killed his girlfriend or his significant other.
There was a big increase in the past 4 years.
For no other reason than the fact that the woman wants to break up. And this has been in the news headlines many, many times. And so, again, this was one of those things that the president could have talked about had he been given the opportunity during the Q&A session.
Also, it was a very good opportunity to show his actual expertise, right?
Right. This would have been great. But no, there was no comment about that. Right now, there has not been a big, significant social pushback from women's organizations yet. But it's still early. It could still happen in the next few days.
So let's keep an eye on it. And Pillar 2, it's going to take a while until we see the actual development. So I guess for the next few weeks, the developments would relate to not South Korea, but other countries that are being considered and slated to have talks with the AUKUS country member states in coming weeks. When it comes to tax-related issues that Yoon mentioned, he kept saying that he will need the parliament's support, especially from the opposition. The opposition, well, the new National Assembly starts on May 30th, so there's still some time for the current 21st National Assembly to bring up some of the issues that they wanted to during the past few years, and that's what they will do. Next week, probably, they will focus on they already mentioned that with the start of the 22nd National Assembly, the opposition will start with the special investigation into the marine issues. So in the next week or so, we'll keep seeing the tug of war between the president, who basically said no to both special investigations, and the opposition.
And just to remind you, please subscribe to Korea Pro so that you can get the daily news briefings, you can get the week ahead, and you will also get invitations to our Seoul Circuit events. So, what are you waiting for? Sign up.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why they matter every morning in your inboxes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for your weekly dose of insight. And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
And I'm John Lei. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.